Hello and welcome to LFC Focus. It is time for the pre-match build-up show with Liverpool taking on Crystal Palace at Anfield on Saturday in a 3 o'clock kickoff in what really should be, let's be honest, a nailed-on 3 points. And I know whenever I say that, I get all sorts of people in the comments being like, don't say that, you know, Palace have got these players that could be a threat, you know, you can never take anything for granted in the Premier League. But this season, we just simply cannot afford to drop any points in a game like this, you know, and it's something that's been characteristic of how good Liverpool have been this season, that we have essentially got maximum points against what we have now termed to be called the rest. And by the rest, we essentially mean any team that's outside the big six, any team that you look at and say, if we don't win that game, that's a poor result. Any team that you can't come away with a draw and say, oh, you know, it's a good point away from home or anything like that. Every time we've played one of those teams so far this season, we have got maximum points. And I think this weekend, Crystal Palace, especially at Anfield as well, should be no different. And of course, with City beating Wolves and only being 4 points behind us, we simply cannot afford to slip up in situations like this, especially considering I think now we've both got 16 games left. We've got 9 home games to go and they've got 9 away games to go. So we've got to really push forward the fact we've got this home advantage, the fact that we've got these kind of games where, you know, if this was away from home, and I'm really glad it isn't, you know, at Selhurst Park, there would be that little seed of doubt in your mind going, oh, you know, something could happen. The great atmosphere of Selhurst Park, it being Crystal Palace, a bit of a bogey side. I'm so glad we got Selhurst out the way with the first away game of the season and don't have to worry about it at all, because I think they are a totally different prospect with this being at home and with it being at Anfield rather than Selhurst. It's gone from being a potential banana skin to people just looking at it and saying Liverpool should be getting 3 points there, and if they don't, there's a serious problem in there somewhere. So of course, it is a fantastic opportunity to put pressure on Man City as well. Once again, we're playing before them. I think that's the way it's going to be for the next few games. I don't know if it's the same for the Leicester game, which is, of course, our next game, which is something like 11 days after this because of what happened with us, of course, going out of the FA Cup. But this is, as always, a great opportunity to put a little bit of pressure on. I know they're only playing Huddersfield the day after, but again, that's away from home. And also Huddersfield, having lost David Wagner, they might have a new, caretaker manager bounce. They might want to do their old manager proud by getting, you know, a result to lift them and sort of get themselves back into the race to avoid relegation and stuff like that. So it could end up being a tough game for Manchester City. It will, of course, always be a tough game provided Liverpool win, because the risk of going 7 points behind us is always going to be in the back of their minds. So, like I said, it should be a nailed-on 3 points. There is no way that this game should be anywhere near as difficult as the Brighton match. This should simply be a game that Liverpool go in, beat them 3 or 4-0, you know, clean sheet, lots of goals, easy performance, game over by about the hour mark or something like that, and then we can all just enjoy ourselves in the break between now and the game against Leicester. But, of course, when it comes down to team news, this has certainly been a little bit of a hectic and a little bit of a depressing week for Liverpool fans, because of course the big piece of news that came out either yesterday or the day before, it's kind of broken over the week, is that Trent Alexander-Arnold has sustained a knee injury and will not be available for at least the next 2 weeks, and potentially up to 4 weeks from now. Now, I think it's interesting the timescales that have been put on offer. The 4 weeks has essentially more come from like the Liverpool side of things, the kind of the mouthpieces like the ones in the Liverpool Echo and stuff like that. Whereas when we've heard it's 2 weeks, that's more been in like the national press and something like that. So I wonder whether it's this kind of ongoing thing Liverpool seem to have, where we slightly overestimate how long a player's going to be out for, because if their rehab takes a bit longer than we'd hoped for, then they normally end up hitting that mark and we're not too upset about it. But if they recover sort of on time or even a little bit quicker than expected, then they will end up coming back within 2 weeks rather than 4. And everyone's saying, wow, our medical staff have performed a miracle. And everyone's really, really happy rather than really, really annoyed because a player's out longer than has been expected. So, you know, I'd actually err more towards the side of 2 weeks. I think 4 weeks is the kind of time frame that Liverpool have put out as a precaution. But hopefully he's back for that game against Bayern, because obviously that's where things really start to heat up and our season will start to get more and more difficult and the pressure will start to really build up for the title race. But for now, I think given the run of games we've got, it could not have been a better time for Trent Alexander-Arnold to sustain this injury. Obviously, it's always annoying when players become unavailable, but if this had happened for a 4-week spell during December, it could have been catastrophic. But the fact of the matter is, the games that he's almost definitely going to be out for are this one, Leicester at home, West Ham away, and I believe Bournemouth at home. So it's not the most awful run of fixtures in the world. And while Joe Gomez is not going to be back available for this game at the weekend, I think he's still, taking a bit of time with his rehab from injury. I think with the gap we have between this and the next fixture against Leicester, I wouldn't be surprised if he's back available for that one. Certainly the one afterwards against West Ham away from home. So I don't think it's the end of the world. It is a bit annoying. It's obviously rubbed everyone up the wrong way because of the fact we've only just let Nathaniel Klein go out on loan, and if we hadn't done that, he probably would have been nailed on to start the game at the weekend. But as it is, Trent Alexander-Arnold is of course unavailable. Other injury news, Gini Wijnaldum is also potentially a major doubt for this game at the weekend. Now, it's been said that they're going to continue to monitor his fitness situation throughout the week, so it could get better, could get worse. I think we'll probably find out a bit more in Jurgen Klopp's press conference, which will probably take place either Thursday or Friday afternoon, but it's one of those that might, we will only find out for sure on Saturday afternoon when he takes a late fitness test or something like that. But I think certainly, because it's Palace at home, and no disrespect, but they obviously aren't the most difficult opponent in the world, if he's not 100%, we probably won't play him, especially given that Trent wasn't 100% against Brighton. We played him through the pain barrier anyway, and we're now in a situation where he's unavailable for 4 weeks. And with Trent, one injury to a first team player we can kind of handle. If Gini Wijnaldum drops as well and other players start to become unavailable, then we've got a wee bit of a problem there. Apart from that, Dejan Lovren's still expected to be on the treatment table for this one, but apparently after this game he will become available once again. And I think Joel Matip, after training pretty much all the way through the week and being on the bench against Brighton, however being unused throughout that game, I think will probably play some role in this game. So as for how I think we're going to line up, the goalie, obviously Alisson Becker, 13 clean sheets in 22 games. I think he's definitely gunning for that Petr Cech record. He has to get, I think, 11 in his last 16 games to at least equal the record of 24 clean sheets in a Premier League season. And of course, he would have to keep a clean sheet in 3/4 of the games between now and the end of the season to actually break the record. I mean, if anyone can do it, it's him, especially with our absolutely fantastic defence in front of him. But, it remains to be seen. I think this is the kind of game this weekend where we should be expecting nothing less than a clean sheet from Alisson Becker. The defence, I think, will probably be Joel Matip and Virgil van Dijk as a centre-back pairing. I think Fabinho, very, very sound at centre-back, occasionally rushes into tackles and stuff like that, but wasn't necessarily a huge problem in either of the games against Wolves or Brighton. But especially if we've got Gini Wijnaldum potentially injured for this game, I would like to see Fabinho drafted back into the midfield position. And of course, with Matip now available, why wouldn't you give him a game there? The fullbacks, I think at right back, it is apparently likely that we're going to go with James Milner at right back as opposed to maybe a Rafa Camacho this weekend, which I think is an entirely sensible decision. Camacho looked slightly raw, slightly undisciplined in the game against Wolves, and I think it would be risky to play him in this game, especially if we haven't got our first choice defence elsewhere. So I think without Joe Gomez, who is of course a very, very good centre-half and can also step out into a right-back role if Camacho gets a little bit too excited and bombs forward too much every now and then. Maybe once Gomez comes back, we can afford to play Camacho at right back, but I think for now, Milner is a very nice, very safe, very solid choice, if slightly annoying in terms of how much we're going to want to go forward down that right-hand side in a game at home against weaker opposition. And then completing the back four is, of course, the one and only Andrew Robertson at left back. And then the midfield, obviously without Gini Wijnaldum, we haven't got too many options here. I think it's going to have to be Henderson and Fabinho. I think people will, of course, be crying out for Naby Keita here, and maybe with it being Palace at home, we could even get away with him playing in that midfield too, and it's something that Jurgen Klopp could try, especially if, as I said earlier on the video, the game's an hour in and we've got half an hour to go where we can kind of do what we like and rest a few players. I'd love to see Keita play in that midfield too, because if he's going to get into this Liverpool side and get an extended run in the team, he's going to have to be able to prove his worth in that position. So hopefully we see him there, but I think certainly from the start, we go with the captain Jordan Henderson and, of course, the fantastic Fabinho alongside him. And then ahead of them, I think we're going full strength with the front line. Obviously, we're now out of that period where we have loads of games. Of course, we've got this huge rest and the training camp away in Dubai after this game, so we can essentially do what we like. We don't have to worry about rotation anymore. So I think it's nailed on that we go with Shaqiri on the right, Firmino down the middle, Mane on the left, and then Mohamed Salah as the central striker. So taking a look at Crystal Palace then, obviously, when I was trying to work out what model they'd follow for this game, what kind of game plan they'd try and implement, I think we would look no further than the game they had against Manchester City at the Etihad in December, because, massive Premier League team they're playing away from home. They're expecting them to attack. They obviously got a positive result in that game as well, so they're going to try and replicate that. But looking back on that game, there are certain parts of it, some more obvious than others, that I would look at and say maybe bit of a fluke, you know, the kind of thing that it's a bit difficult to repeat. The Andros Townsend goal certainly stands out as something that I don't think he's going to be pulling off every week. You know, he can score a worldie, he's great outside of the box, but volleys like that are not scored every day of the week. And I think from those of us who saw it, I mean, pretty much everyone did, there were quite a few of us who said maybe Alisson Becker does a little bit better with that, certainly just by virtue of not being positioned all the way in the other corner of the goal for no reason, like Edison Moraes was for Manchester City. And also the Jeffrey Schlupp goal that was scored for their first goal, I think was a mark of some really, really high quality attacking play. You know, the way he manages to get the finish through, I think it's Kyle Walker's legs, fired at pace, right past the goalkeeper and right into the bottom corner, is just not the kind of thing he's capable of replicating every week. So, of course, we've got to be aware of those type of things because that's the kind of moments they'll be relying on. And I think it's so important that we don't allow them to go ahead at any point, because once they did go ahead, and especially once they established a 2-goal lead, they really did sit back and defend. You know, they created solid banks, solid lines, one line of 4 or 5, another line of 4 or 5, and then a lone striker like Zaha, or potentially someone else who I might mention later, ploughing the lone furrows further up the pitch. So if they go ahead, then we've got a problem. And of course, they do certainly have a knack of winning penalties as well. So we've got to be careful of that, because we don't want to give a cheap one away like we did at Selhurst Park last season, because we created an uphill slog for us there, where we ended up having to win the game, scrap our way through with a late winner from Mohamed Salah to win 2-1. So we've got to be careful we don't concede. I think the most important thing to avoid that is just to defend vigilantly, because one thing I noticed about Man City was at times in that game, they defended really lazily. That was the game that got Kyle Walker dropped, because he played so poorly. He gave away the penalty stupidly. It's his fault that Schlupp scores because he doesn't get tight enough to him. So basically, we've just got to be aware that as bad as Crystal Palace are, essentially, as much as we're not expecting them to blitz us or anything like that, when they do get the ball, when they do get into dangerous areas, treat them like you would any other team in the Premier League, and do not give them an inch of space to actually believe that they could get something out of the game. And of course, like I said, they're going to defend with solid banks, regardless even of whether they go ahead or whether they go behind. So I think it's so important that Liverpool don't do what we did against Brighton, where we just pass it round the back, you know, passes here, passes there, not really doing anything, not really making anything happen. We've got to hit them where it hurts. We've got to be proactive in terms of the way we attack. We've got to do what we did for the first 10 minutes of that second half, where I think it was very intelligent, the movement that our attacking players was offering. I really liked how Salah would drop deep, how he'd drop wide, how he'd stop being predictable in terms of his positioning, and ask questions of defenders, because their centre-backs will be prepared to deal with Mohamed Salah all week. Roy Hodgson will have been drilling Mamadou Sakho, and you know, there's already a bonus point there, because Salah always seems to get the better of Mamadou Sakho in some way or another. I think we could be looking at yet another penalty won and scored by Mohamed Salah, as long as he just gets tight to Mamadou Sakho at any point. And I think James Tompkins will probably be the other defender. They will have been drilled on how to deal with Mohamed Salah. If he then drifts wide and causes a problem for their fullback, and suddenly the central defenders have to deal with Shaqiri or Mane or Firmino, then they're going to start to struggle. And also, if you do kind of have this free-flowing movement, you start to break the lines. You know, what we also need is creative players. It's why I want Fabinho in midfield. It's why I want Shaqiri playing in that attack, because they're the kind of players who can play lofted balls, clever little through balls through people's legs, through the lines, to break those strong banks of defence and pick out the kind of movement that I'm hoping our attackers will offer. So it's something we know Liverpool can break down defences like this. We've seen it before. We've also seen against Brighton what happens when we don't quite click and when we don't quite get it right. So I think it's just important that Liverpool know what the plan is here, that every player knows what their role is, that every player knows they're going to have to expect to play out of position. They're going to have to expect to try and pick out their teammates when they're not necessarily where they always expect they're going to be. And once they know that's going to happen, once they play to the benefit of that kind of situation, then I'd hope that we get a lot of goals. And also, as a side note, Palace do seem to have, you know, which is a surprise considering how good they used to be from these kind of situations, a set-piece problem. I watched their game against Watford that they played last weekend, where they lost 2-1, and both of Watford's goals come from pretty scrappy set pieces, situations where Palace don't clear their lines. And given how good Liverpool have been at the second phase of set pieces, where the ball does get cleared and then we recycle it, we get the ball back into the box, we've scored from quite a lot of those situations. And I think given how disorganised this Palace defence is, I can see us trying to take advantage of that as well. So Palace are there for the taking in terms of we know how to break down their defence. It's just a matter of making sure we've got the plan straight, we know what we're doing, and we implement it to the best of our ability. So in terms of how Palace are actually going to set up for this game, I'd be very, very interested to see how Roy Hodgson picks his attacking lineup for this one, simply because Benteke hasn't been in the team pretty much at all. He's been restricted mostly just to sub appearances for quite a lot of this season. However, given how much they struggled to finish their dinner against Watford, they had countless chances. They had one-on-ones, they had set pieces, they had, balls played across the box that players were just stretching and couldn't quite reach or couldn't get their feet sorted out to put into an empty net or anything like that. They just could not score no matter what they did, and it took a pretty scrappy own goal on Watford's part for them to actually take the lead. So I wouldn't be surprised if Roy Hodgson shuffles the pack going forward and does consider playing Christian Benteke, simply because while he does have his flaws, he is also a bit of a finisher. He's a recognised striker, which Palace didn't have in their starting 11 against Watford. And also, I just think, obviously, with it being against Liverpool, with it being at Anfield, he's done well there in the past against us, and he will have a little bit of a point to prove. And obviously, if they do play Benteke, then we've got to consider that. We've got to work out how to make sure we don't let him win knockdowns, we don't let him win headers, we don't let him bully our centre-halves or anything like that. But, of course, at the end of the day, we've seen our centre-halves and our midfielders come up against players like him before and do incredibly well. So listen, I'm not hugely worried. I don't think it'll be a walk in the park, but if Liverpool have got serious aspirations of lasting the full length of this title race and keeping that 4-point gap open between us and Manchester City, then this is just a game we can't just go out and scrap 1-0 like we did against Brighton. This has got to be a game that we have got to win 3 or 4-0 or something like that. So of course I'm backing the Liverpool win. I'm backing a reasonably comfortable Liverpool win, because I think if you're not expecting that from this game, then you are simply not going to be cut out for this title race whatsoever. So that is all today's video. Thank you guys very, very much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, as always, you know what to do. Hit that like button down there, hit that subscribe button there if you're new around here. Check out some of the other videos that have been out on the channel over the past few days as well. Don't forget to follow at LIVCRY Focus TV on Twitter, and I'll be back on Saturday outside Anfield after Liverpool have hopefully beaten Crystal Palace to keep up that lead at the top of the table. Until then, bye for now.